Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Hot on the Case. If this is your first time joining us for an investigation, here at Hot on the Case, we talk all things true crime with a focus on the unsolved and unexplained. If mysteries are your thing, please consider following the show whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube. In this week's investigation, we're looking into the tragic murder of a young pregnant mother and her unborn child. This is a puzzling, confusing, and controversial case, mainly because the prime suspect is a baby-faced fifth grader. Did 11-year-old Jordan Brown murder his father's fiancé and his unborn baby brother? Or was the fifth grader framed for double homicide? My name is Brianna, and I'm hot on the case. In February 2009, 26-year-old Kenzie Houk, a single mother of two young daughters, had escaped an abusive relationship of 6 years and had started a new relationship with a new man. And his name was Chris Brown. He was also a single parent. Kenzie and Chris had known each other since school. They lived in Wampum, Pennsylvania, a super small town, population of around 600 people, where everyone knows everyone and nothing bad ever happens. The two reconnected and really hit it off. By 2009, the two were engaged and moved their blended family into a little farmhouse they could call their own. Typically, the blending of two families can be difficult, but not for Kenzie and Chris. Kenzie's two daughters, 7-year-old Janessa and 4-year-old Adeline, really loved having Chris as a father figure. And Chris's 11-year-old son, Jordan, loved Kenzie and having two sisters. Chris had had full custody of Jordan for a majority of Jordan's life. The father-son duo were very close. Jordan was a good, sweet kid, an all-American kid. He played baseball. He was the quarterback for the school's football team that his dad coached. Because they lived in a rural small town, the father-son loved all things outdoors, but especially hunting. And Chris and Jordan really loved their little family of two, but excitedly opened their lives up to Kenzie and her two daughters. And since Jordan's biological mother was not in the picture, Jordan was already calling Kenzie mom. Kenzie and Chris were also expecting a child of their own. By February 2009, Kenzie was nearly 9 months pregnant with a son that they planned to name Chris after his father. And Jordan seemed like he could not be happier about the addition of a new little baby brother, a baby brother that he always wanted. It really did seem like this beautiful blended family had the perfect life. Until February 20th, 2009. That morning, their house was a little chaotic. Chris was running late for work, and his soon-to-be wife Kenzie, who was very pregnant and not feeling great, asked if Chris would stay home with her that morning. Chris said no. He said he had to go to work, especially considering that their family of 5 was about to become a family of 6. Chris left for work that morning by 8 a.m., a decision that he says he will regret for the rest of his life. And then it was Jordan and Janessa's turn to get ready and leave for school, and they were also kind of running late. Kenzie and Chris shared a downstairs bedroom, but would soon be switching with Jordan's upstairs bedroom once the baby arrived. Jordan had already started moving some of his stuff into his soon-to-be downstairs bedroom, which included a majority of his clothes. So that morning, Jordan went to the downstairs bedroom so he could get some of his clothes from Kenzie's bedroom and change in the bathroom. As 8:15 a.m. approached, Kenzie yelled for Jordan and Janessa to run out the door before they missed the school bus, and the two did, racing each other all the way down the driveway to the bus by 8:15. The only two people left in the home were 26-year-old Kenzie, who already had gone to go lay down and go back to bed, and 4-year-old Adeline, who was too young to go to school and was still sleeping. At 9 a.m., tree trimmers that Kenzie and Chris hired to do some work on their property arrived, and shortly later, one of the tree trimmers noticed 4-year-old Adeline in the front doorway. She was crying and screaming that her mom was dead. When paramedics and police first arrived and they found Kenzie laying in her bed covered in blood, they initially thought that Kenzie was suffering some kind of medical emergency, that she possibly hemorrhaged or something. It wasn't until the coroner arrived and started to move Kenzie around that he stated, "Something is wrong. We have a problem. There's a gunshot wound." 26-year-old Kenzie had been killed by a single gunshot to her head, and tragically her unborn son was killed as well. The news first had to be broken to Chris that his fiancé and his unborn son were dead, and obviously Chris was devastated, but he was also shocked and confused. He had just seen Kenzie an hour earlier. He had just kissed her goodbye. And of course, when it comes to murder cases of all young women, first the police had to look at the boyfriend. So Chris was brought to the police department to be questioned as a possible suspect. Chris's hands were tested for gunshot residue, which came back clean. And Chris also had an airtight alibi because he was at work, so he was quickly cleared of any suspicion. It seemed like Janessa and Jordan were the last people to see Kenzie alive. They left for school at 8:15, 45 minutes later at 9 a.m., she's been found dead. So they were both questioned 4 separate times that day. In Janessa's initial interview, she said that morning was completely normal and nothing out of the ordinary happened. Jordan had a similar story, but he also mentioned that as him and Janessa were walking to the school bus, he noticed a black pickup truck parked near their garage that he had never seen before. But he knew that these tree trimmers were planning on coming that morning, so he just assumed that it was one of their trucks. That evening, Kenzie's daughters spent the night at her parents' house, and Chris and Jordan returned home together. They spent that night grieving, hugging, crying until it was very late, and they both just drifted to sleep from pure exhaustion. It actually wasn't much later after they fell asleep that Chris woke up at 3:30 in the morning to the police banging on his front door, there to arrest his 11-year-old son Jordan for the first-degree murder of Kenzie and her unborn baby. Jordan was being charged with double homicide and would be tried as an adult, since first-degree murder is not seen as a juvenile crime in Pennsylvania. Meaning, if Jordan was found guilty, he would be the youngest person in America to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This is a little baby-faced 5th grader facing life in prison. Jordan said he was so confused. One moment, he's sleeping in his father's arms, and the next minute he's in the back of a police car, wearing handcuffs that barely fit him. Jordan was brought to the county jail, a facility for adults, and had to share a cell with multiple adult criminals. They gave him the smallest size prison jumpsuit, and still he was drowning in it. He had to roll the sleeves and the pant legs multiple times to even move around. What damning evidence did the police have that could justify arresting an 11-year-old for double homicide only 18 hours after the murders were committed? Well, during the investigation, it was determined that Kenzie was shot with a 20-gauge shotgun, and there were many firearms in the home. As previously mentioned, Chris and Jordan were hunting folk. Jordan even had access to his own child-sized shotgun that he had gotten for Christmas 2 months prior. During a search of the home, an officer noticed that Jordan's 20-gauge shotgun that was hanging in his room had a strong odor of gunshot residue coming from it, like it had recently been fired. And during 7-year-old Janessa's 4th interview with police, Janessa recalled an additional detail that she hadn't mentioned earlier. She said that morning, before leaving for school, Jordan was messing with and moving around his guns. And while she was waiting for Jordan so they could go to the bus stop together, Janessa heard a loud boom noise that she said sounded like a gun. So obviously, this is a really odd thing for someone to forget to mention in their first 3 interviews, but you have to remember, this is a 7-year-old girl whose mom has just died. It's possible that Janessa was in shock or just scared of getting Jordan in trouble. But there's also been reports that Janessa only added this detail after possibly being suggested by police and her grandparents that Jordan had involvement somehow in her mom's murder. Jordan denied touching any guns that morning and also denied killing Kenzie, but Janessa wasn't the only person to change her story. Jordan also added details to his story in his later interviews. Firstly, he claimed that he actually saw a man in that black truck parked near his home that he didn't mention at first, and that man was wearing a baseball hat and was kind of hunching over in the car like he didn't want to be seen by anyone. And also, while Janessa and him were walking to the school bus that day, he put his hand in his jacket pockets. He felt some lint in his pocket, so he took it out and he threw it on the ground, which seems like an odd detail to just remember, but also an odd detail to tell the police. But interestingly enough, when police searched the property, alongside Jordan's footprints in the snow that he would have taken on that path to the bus that morning, was a 20-gauge shotgun shell. Chris and Jordan were hunters, like I've said multiple times, so there were many bullets and shells on the property, but they consistently used the word pristine to describe this bullet shell, obviously to imply that it hadn't been outside in the elements for very long. The police strongly believed that this was the shell from the bullet that killed Kenzie, and Jordan, on his walk to the bus that morning, felt it in his pocket and threw it on the ground, and that Jordan only mentioned this lint story to the police as a way to kind of clear his conscience by telling a half-truth. The police strongly believed that Jordan's shotgun reeking of GSR and a shotgun shell along the path that Jordan took that morning was quite literally their smoking gun, and that 11-year-old Jordan was the killer that they were looking for. Even though they never tested Jordan's hands for gunshot residue, they did test his clothing, which found a small amount of GSR on the jacket and the pants. But reportedly, this was the same outfit that Jordan wore to a turkey hunt only a couple days prior. Some friends and family, but especially Chris, felt that there was another suspect that the police should be looking into, and that was Kenzie's abusive ex-boyfriend of 6 years named Adam Harvey. Kenzie was terrified of Adam, and everyone knew it. Adam had a history of violence and even threatened to kill Kenzie and her family, so Kenzie had to file a restraining order against him. Recently, Adam had even gotten more rageful towards Kenzie, since her 4-year-old daughter, who he believed was his, was confirmed to not be his biological child. And Adam had just gotten these paternity test results only 1 week before Kenzie was found murdered. So to recap, Adam has a history of domestic violence, has a clear motive to want Kenzie dead, and has also threatened to kill Kenzie and her family in the past. He's looking like an obvious suspect, way more obvious than 11-year-old Jordan Brown. Those paternity results actually infuriated Adam so much that when Adam ran into Kenzie's family at a restaurant in town, he confronted them, yelling and screaming and threatening them until Adam had to be restrained and removed from the restaurant. And that interaction with Kenzie's family was less than 12 hours before Kenzie was found killed in her bed. It's all looking very suspicious, and even more so, the vehicle that Adam drove was a black pickup truck, a fact that Jordan would have no way of knowing. The police did speak with Adam that very day, and it had recently snowed in the area, and the snow on the hood of his truck was intact. And the police felt that it was impossible for Adam to drive the 24 miles to Kenzie and Chris's house and back without disturbing the snow on his truck in the slightest. Adam's dad also gave him an alibi, said that he was home sleeping the entire morning of the murder. Adam's hands were also tested for GSR, and as well as he was given a polygraph. Both tests Adam passed, and he was cleared of any suspicion. But just to play devil's advocate for a minute here, I personally never think that a parent giving their child an alibi should ever be considered airtight. I'm also quite curious to know how much snow was actually on Adam's truck for it to clear him of suspicion of murder. For me personally, I think snow being on someone's truck is pretty weak as evidence goes, so I'm pretty curious to know if the snow was also covering Adam's windshield. Nonetheless, police determined that Adam Harvey having an involvement in the murder of his ex Kenzie and her newborn baby was pretty much impossible. That there was absolutely no way that Adam would know what time Kenzie would be in that home alone, since an intruder of any kind would only have a 45-minute window max to break in after Janessa and Jordan left for school, commit this murder, and then sneak out undetected with no one seeing them before the tree trimmers arrived. And because of all of these reasons and more, the police strongly believed that Kenzie was already dead by the time Jordan and Janessa left for school. There's also no way that Adam or any other intruder would know that the front door would be unlocked or where the family kept their shotguns, since there's absolutely no way an intruder would bring a gun of that size to kill someone in broad daylight. Although you would probably expect Kenzie's family, but especially her parents, to believe that her abusive ex was responsible for killing her, considering that they knew his entire history of domestic violence, all of his threats, and knew that he was angry and violent about this entire paternity situation less than 12 hours before she was found murdered, Kenzie's parents actually agreed with the police's theory and believed that 11-year-old Jordan was responsible and that he was guilty. They said that Jordan had a dark, angry side to him, and I definitely think that this should carry some weight here, that Kenzie's parents were quicker to blame a baby-faced 5th grader than an abusive ex-boyfriend. It really makes you wonder, what are we missing here? And is Jordan not as happy and sweet as his father Chris would like to make him out to be? Jordan's defense team fought to get Jordan moved to a juvenile facility, and eventually Jordan was transferred to a facility for juveniles, but this was a detention center that was a 230-mile, 4-hour round trip for Chris to visit his son. Regardless, Chris would visit his son every single day, no matter how much it cost him, and it cost him money, it cost him time, and eventually it cost Chris his job. Jordan would be held at this detention center for the next 3 years awaiting his trial, and his defense team fought over and over again to have him be tried as a juvenile instead of an adult. Originally, this order was denied by a judge because Jordan would not take responsibility for his crime, so he would be unlikely to be rehabilitated. This is a ruling that's confusing to me personally because I was under the impression in America, you're innocent until proven guilty. It actually was determined that this ruling was a violation against Jordan's Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate himself. And in 2011, Jordan's case was finally ordered to be moved to juvenile court, and his trial began in April 2012. The prosecution's theory was that Jordan wasn't as happy about the arrival of his new baby brother as everyone thought he was. That in reality, Jordan was jealous and angry about all the changes in his life. He liked it when it was just him and his dad. And now 3 girls have moved in, and there's a new little baby boy on the way that Kenzie wants to name after his dad. He didn't get to be named after his dad. And now on top of all of that, Jordan was being pushed out of his bedroom and being moved into a bedroom in the basement. The prosecution believed that that morning after his father left for work, Jordan made the impulsive decision to remove what was making him so unhappy. That Jordan went upstairs, he loaded his shotgun, he took it downstairs, concealing it from Janessa. He shot Kenzie while she slept, then he brought the gun back upstairs, unloaded it, and went to school like nothing happened, without leaving behind any evidence or mess. Because there was no blood or any kind of biological matter on Jordan, on Jordan's clothes, or the gun, which you would expect from a blast that would come from a shotgun. And after only a 3-day trial, Jordan Brown was found delinquent, which is the juvenile court equivalent of a guilty verdict for the first-degree homicide of Kenzie and the criminal homicide of her unborn son. Jordan's defense team began to immediately appeal the decision, and they had a slew of reasons why they believed that the case was mishandled and that there was not enough evidence to convict Jordan. Since first responders initially did not believe that Kenzie's death was a homicide, they did not take measures to ensure the crime scene was not compromised, and by the time they realized that they were investigating a murder, it was too late, and for that reason, investigators never tested the house for fingerprints. They were also never able to even 100% determine if Jordan's gun was the gun used in Kenzie's murder, and it was only assumed to be the murder weapon because that officer said the gun smelled like it had recently been fired. But it later came out that the officer that smelled Jordan's gun and said that it smelled like gunshot residue had never been trained on how to determine if a gun had recently been fired. But just to play devil's advocate once more, I personally don't believe that it would take an excessive amount of training to smell if a gun smelled like it had recently been fired. I personally don't know a lot about guns, but from my research, apparently the smell is pretty potent. But to the defense's point, there really wasn't any concrete evidence that proved that Jordan was guilty. And shortly before Jordan Brown's 18th birthday, after serving 7 years in prison, he was released on probation on June 13th, 2016. And then about 2 years later, Jordan's case was finally heard by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and on July 18th, 2018, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned Jordan's conviction due to insufficient evidence. So just to be clear, the Supreme Court did not find Jordan Brown innocent, just that he couldn't be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. This also came with double jeopardy laws, meaning that Jordan Brown could never be retried for this crime. So you guys already know, if you've ever watched one of my videos before, when it comes to cases like this, I always like to try and find what is the most likely answer. So let's quickly review all the evidence that proves that Jordan Brown is innocent and all the evidence that proves that Jordan Brown is guilty. First, let's review all the evidence of Jordan Brown's innocence. The only witness that the police had was a 7-year-old girl that changed her story after being interviewed multiple times. No blood or any other kind of biological matter was found on Jordan, his clothes, or the gun that was believed to be the murder weapon. But it could also never 100% be proven that Jordan's gun was the weapon that killed Kenzie. The police and prosecution's theory that Jordan went upstairs, grabbed the gun, loaded it, brought the gun downstairs, killed his soon-to-be stepmom, then went back upstairs, unloaded the gun, cleaned it of any evidence, and then went to school like nothing happened seemed far-fetched. Especially since no one at Jordan's school could ever be found to testify that Jordan seemed odd that day, that he seemed stressed out, that he seemed angry, or even seemed upset. Even adult killers show a little bit of distress after killing someone. Also, very young killers are rare, although they're not unheard of, but Jordan Brown did not fit the profile of a child killer. In fact, his personality was kind of the opposite of one. He was never diagnosed with any kind of mental disorder or any personality or behavior disorder. Jordan Brown had never gotten in any kind of significant trouble before. Child killers also, more times than not, confess under the pressure of police interrogation, but Jordan Brown has always maintained his innocence until this very day. Now, let's review all the evidence that makes Jordan Brown look guilty. There is absolutely zero evidence that any intruder was in the home and killed Kenzie Houk. Jordan was the only person in the home during the time the murder could have been committed that knew how to use a gun. His soon-to-be stepsister claimed to have seen him moving his guns around shortly before she heard a gunshot. Gunshot residue was found on the clothing that Jordan was wearing the day that Kenzie was shot. It had recently snowed in the area, and there were no unidentified tire marks or footprints on the property. A shotgun shell believing to have come from the bullet that killed Kenzie was found alongside Jordan's footprints in the snow, in the exact area Jordan confessed to throwing something on the ground out of his pocket. The faculty at the facility that Jordan was being detained at said that Jordan never showed any emotion when it came to Kenzie's murder. He also struggled to take responsibility anytime he did something wrong. They also claimed that he had a short temper. Now, if you come to my channel, come to my podcast looking for my opinion, I do believe that the most likely answer is that Jordan Brown is guilty, although I am not 100% convinced. And I would not in any way bet the house on his guilt like I would in other cases that we have covered. And I 100% agree with the Supreme Court's decision to overthrow his conviction due to a lack of evidence. I do not believe that there was enough evidence to ever convict him in the first place. But to this very day, the police and Kenzie's parents are convinced that Jordan Brown was the one responsible, although he has continued to maintain his innocence. Jordan Brown claims that the entire situation gave him PTSD. He went on to study computer science in college and has said that he is trying to move on with his life. However, he did file a lawsuit against the state troopers that arrested him, and he did lose that lawsuit last month in December of 2024. I'm really interested to get your guys' thoughts on this case. Do you think that Jordan Brown is guilty without a doubt? He's guilty, but there's not enough evidence to prove it, or that Jordan Brown is innocent? Definitely leave me all your thoughts and theories in the comment section below, because I really do read every single comment that comes in. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider subscribing on YouTube and also following the show on Spotify and/or Apple Podcasts. And if you haven't already, please rate and review the show, because really any interaction with the show will really help a lot. And that is all I have with this week's investigation, and I will see you guys next week when we are hot on the case once again.